I was a diversity hire. If I hadn't gotten in, I wouldn't have gotten there. Getting there on the merits is a ridiculous concept in this business where you can be somebody's brother and get on their TV show. So why does anybody want to get out there on their own?
Right.
It's not about that. So you got to get in, and once you're in, and it's about knowing enough people.
Right.
Really, that's what it is. You are building your village because you are in
Right.
this business for the next 50 years.
We can't have it both ways.
Right.
And so
Right.
we got to get in there and kill it and know that every time, like for me, I always felt like whoever's coming behind me, like if I stink this up, it's going to leave a stink around the idea of the diversity hire.
Yeah.
And that will be more challenging for the next person who comes
And that's
behind
so
me.
unfair.
Yeah.
It's so unfair because, the other guys don't have that same thing. Then it's just one guy who screwed up.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is a podcast on directing for anybody that's quite simply ever watched anything. Pete converses with a wide range of fellow directors, writers, actors, showrunners, producers, executives, and more on a journey to determine just what makes a good director and why we'll always need stories. The Director is Pete Chatmon's digital studio, built on the pillars of craftsmanship that ensure a unique vision. I'm talking about story, innovation, perspective. Learn more about The Director, and better yet, get your official Director's Chair wear by visiting www.drctr.video. That's drctr.video.
All right, people, what's up? Welcome to episode 34 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. And I am happy to welcome our guest, Kelly Edwards, the author of The Executive Chair, A Writer's Guide to TV Series Development. So this is for all you writers out there. Pick that up, scoop it up, read it, get into it. Honestly, I think it's for anybody in the television and film industry. There are a lot of gems in this book, and Kelly is very candid on her journey. But before we get into the book and the interview with the lovely Kelly Edwards, I will give you the rundown on what's been popping off in my world. Let's see, at the time of this recording, because I'm gonna let y'all know a little backstory. I do these interviews in bunches when I can, when I have windows of time, because time is a precious commodity. And after I do the interviews, I wait until the launch of the interview or the episode to do the intro and the outro. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll notice the outfit change because, it's two different times. But as I'm recording this now, I just finished day 7 of 9 on episode 102 of Reasonable Doubt. And it is going, as they say, somewhere in the world, swimmingly. The cast has been amazing. We've got Emayatsi Cornaldi. We've got Michael Ealy, McKinley Freeman, Sean Patrick Thomas, Pauletta Washington, Tim Joe, Christopher Casarino, Angela Grovey, Shannon Kane, Tiffany Yvonne Cox, who else? I don't want to leave anyone out. Nefertari Spencer. We've got an amazing cast. They're all in a variety of shows that you have watched and probably are watching. But happy about the work we've been able to achieve. Feel like we're in a good groove watching these characters kind of come to life with the talents of these actors. And the crew is congealing. And I think that's all part of the beautiful TV production process. What else? Other than that, I recently did a cool bit of press for HBO Max for episode 5 of The Flight Attendant that I directed. And that'll be coming to you soon. I will not step on the release date, but it will be coming to you soon. And my understanding is that I'm talking, it'll be my first after the episode little tidbit talking about what we accomplished and what our approach was in the visual aspect of the storytelling and in how we attacked and interpreted the story. So super amped about that. That was an amazing episode, very challenging. And for me as a director, I'm always looking for the challenge. And so, in a bit of a perfect segue, I'll loop it back to Kelly. I met her coming out of my short film Black Card being selected into the HBO ABFF short film competition, which put $5,000 into the pocket of my production as part of being a finalist, as one of 5 finalists. And that kind of put me on the road to all of the director development programs that I did, including Sony, HBO Access, Disney ABC, and NBC Universal, all of which I mentioned in my book, Transitions. But Kelly was one of many people, or really a handful of people, like Brett King over at Sony, who were instrumental in helping to shape helping to shape the skills that I had, this kind of raw talent, and kind of learning how to mold it for what this television industry and really the industry of Hollywood would be responsive to, so I could go from a guy who wanted to work to a guy who was working. And so I'm really happy we talk about that in the interview. Very candid. Had the pleasure of last seeing Kelly in Paris when we were there in 2019 for New Year's Eve, Kelly and I. And she's just a real person, a real down-to-earth person that has gone from mentor to friend. And I think that's pretty dope. So without further ado, let's step into episode 34 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon, starring Kelly Edwards.
Roll sound. Speed.
The interview. Take 1.
Action. Tell me, what in your mind and in your experience makes a good story?
You know, that's you starting off right now with a hard one. That is like you jumped into the deep end. What makes a good story? I think my personal preference for story, and I think that story can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. I know that there's the Joseph Campbell idea, there's the Chris Vogler idea, there's the Robert McKee. So everyone has this template, which I do think holds true, which is you have a really compelling character. That person goes on a journey. There are setbacks along the way. There is a surge and a triumph, a major loss of some kind, and then a rise at the end, which I know that when I'm thinking about and going to movies and they don't have those elements, I miss them because I'm anxious to follow that format. There's something about, maybe it's even the DNA that we all have, or maybe it's just conditioning, but there's that need for us to see the trials and the tribulations and then the successes. And then we want to know that there's this crisis that we then have to overcome. And I think it's just this kind of innate feeling that we all feel like that could be me. But I do think it all starts with a compelling character. I think if you don't have that and I find that the stories that sort of go for just concept alone leave me feeling hollow. I need to feel that emotion. I need to feel that gut response of elation at the end. Those are the best stories for me. But it all starts from character. And when you don't have character, and you don't know who your character is or what journey they're going on, it all falls apart. I think in my own writing, I find that I have to constantly tweak and calibrate and recalibrate. Well, what is the story? What is the best way to tell that story? Sometimes the hardest part is knowing that, hey, I thought this great idea and it should take this road, but then your character goes, no, that's not actually the story I want to tell. And their character tries to push you into something else, and you have to follow that, and then leave behind what your preconceived notions of what story you were trying to tell, and really follow it down the rabbit hole. And then you kind of come to the place that you didn't want to come to in the first place, which is, it's hard. It's hard to go there. It's hard to get to the juicy center because it is so, it can be damaging, it can be traumatic, it can be heart-wrenching, but it's also ultimately the most fulfilling stories come out of that.
I feel like writers and actors have probably a unique challenge in the sense that the actor has to dive into the abyss, the writer has to create it, right? And as humans, we're more or less averse to the types of things that make good stories, right? Like we don't want to have days like your favorite action movie where the world's at stake. I don't want that shit to be Friday.
Exactly.
I want to just get up and do the thing I do at 10:15. So what's the challenge for the writer, you think, in trying to fight this natural inclination to avoid those things while being tasked with pushing their characters into those types of vulnerable situations?
Yeah, that's the hard thing. I think as writers, we are conditioned. I actually saw this. I just last night I stumbled across St. Vincent's masterclass. Was not even thinking about it, never heard of her. And all of a sudden I'm watching her do this whole thing about creating music. And almost every single thing that she said could apply to a script. And in it, she talks about sometimes doing those hard things and coming to that place where you are really tapping into, I'm going to see, what did she say? She said, as artists, we are porous. And so we absorb. And I think, and she also said something about, and somewhere all that has to come out. So I do think that we internalize, we take it in, and then we're trying to make sense of the world. And we're trying to give the world meaning and to share it so that we can be whole, but then it also by default makes other people whole. So I think that innate need to tell those stories also is the need to work it out emotionally. I think we can't help it, but it's hard. And then God bless all the actors who really have to put themselves out there emotionally and do that work, because then they have to take that information, they have to make it feel real for them, and then on the other end of that, let their guts out onto the screen. And I'm just like, I don't have that kind of courage. I could do that on a computer, but that kind of courage, that's wild,
Yeah, it's beautiful when you see it. Is what was the first story? It could be a movie or family legend, but like the first thing where you were like, oh, that impacts me, or I see what that story is trying to do.
Yeah, I had this question came up recently at a I was doing a talk at a festival at Catalyst Fest, and I was talking about, and I don't even know if it was the very first story. I can't say it was the first story, but it was certainly one of the most impactful, which was when I saw Roots as a child. And it was an event where the entire family gathered together for every single night. And when it wasn't on, and I think it was consecutive nights, or it was like a couple nights, and then you had to wait a couple days and a couple more nights. But it was so impactful because we had known about the book before it came out. Everyone had read the book. There was a lot of anticipation about it. And when you finally saw it on television, it was such an event that I can remember when I think about it, and I think about watching that television, I can remember exactly where I sat. I can remember how I felt. I can remember the pride that I felt. I remember not ever having heard that story before, and I was a kid. So, but it was so impactful that you remember that moment. You remember where you were when 9/11 happened, for sure. I remember where I was when I saw Roots.
And sure. was that an episode a night for 5 nights? What was
it was something like that. It was,
yeah.
But it was, and it might have been like 2 hours per. It might have been, and I don't remember, because I remember a lot of the shows that were like that. Thornbirds and Shogun and all those things that had come out, Captains and the Kings at the same time. Those kinds of epic rich men, poor men series when they came out. Most of the times they were every night. Sometimes it was like a Monday or a Tuesday night, and then they'd skip a Wednesday, and go to a Thursday, or it would be the following week you get another couple of episodes. So I don't remember exactly how it laid out in the week, but I do
Right.
remember that it was appointment television for sure. You could not be a person of color and not have watched that when it was on
Right.
at the time.
Right. So what brought you to pursuing an education in this field at Vassar?
Well, I had been in theater and dance as a kid. So I took ballet classes, 2 ballet classes every day from maybe 7 to 18, I think.
Wow.
And I was doing toe work, and I really desperately wanted to be a prima ballerina, and I did not have the body for it. I was a short, chunky girl with a short neck and thick thighs, and I did not have what it took to be a prima ballerina, but I desperately wanted to be some sort of a dancer. And I loved musicals, and I wanted to tap, and I was terrible at it. So I was just like I was like that kid who was like, "Mom, I want to be a star." But I knew I didn't really want to be a star. I didn't want to be an actor. I just loved entertainment. And when I got into high school, I was the gal who was in the theater department. So I did, we did the musicals. We did Oklahoma. I can still remember all the songs today. But I was that kid. And then when I went to college at Vassar, they didn't have a dance department. So I got into the theater department and was a theater major, and thought at one point I was originally going to be an English major, but I ended up having so many theater credits that they said, well, you could graduate as a theater major. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. I won't do a
Right.
thesis. Looking back on it, I go, I should have done both. I should have done the thesis so that I could have had the English credit. Not that it mattered in my life, but it's just one of those check marks you kind of want to go, I should have had 2 degrees. So I think that the pathway was I was just following what I loved. And that was following all of the plays that I was doing and writing things on my own, and so it was just sort of it was just a passion. And then when
Right.
I got out of school, I knew that I didn't want to act. I wanted to be behind the scenes. I was really clear on that really early. And so when I got out of school, I just went right into, the behind the scenes stuff, the development process, the writing side of the business.
So was there a gap in time between Vassar and Emerson and pursuing writing for film and TV?
Oh
Or
my
did you
God.
go?
No. It was like a 30-year gap. Oh my God. Yes, I'm proof positive that you can start a career over. You can do something completely different than you started out being. But I'm going to say it was like a circular trajectory, because I think I went on my own hero's journey. How about that?
Yes,
Um, I
yes.
started off um, I started off working for uh, in a talent manager's office, and I was miserably bad at it. But I was looking for, a way in, and
Wait,
I was
can we start? What were you bad at? I'd love
everything,
to.
everything. And of course, at the time, you think that you're brilliant, but I was terrible at it. So I didn't understand when people said, "Are you a what do they usually say? They say, "Are you detail oriented?" And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
"Who cares about details?" I'm like, "What is that about?" And then you won't realize until you hire your own assistant, oh, that's why it's important to be detail oriented. But I would
Right.
let things slip through the cracks all the time. I worked for Dolores Robinson. So Holly Robin Heat's mom was my boss. My friend Mark Kaplan knew Holly from college. They went to Sarah Lawrence together. But I had known Dolores. This is how twisted this whole business goes back, right? When my mom and I were living in Beverly Hills when I was a kid, my mom knew Dolores's husband. I can't remember his name right now. Was it Gordon Robinson? Anyway, she knew Dolores's first husband. They were friends. So I already I had her name in my, in my memory bank. But when Mark, who I went to high school with, went to college with Holly, he got out of college and was working for Dolores for a summer. But there was a 1 month gap between him leaving her as a summer job and her new assistant who was starting, I think, in September. And he said,
Right.
would you like to take over for me? And I said, sure. So I went in and I took that job. And on a daily basis, I was screwing something up. I was forgetting to give people, their appointments. I was like, she was always yelling at me for some reason. And for me, she was a very formidable, scary kind of boss. And in retrospect, you go back and she's like, no, she's just doing her job. She was just trying to get, people booked. You were the one who was like an idiot. So I worked for her for a month. I learned what not to do. I was just so lackadaisical at answering the phones and giving her messages. And yet there was a job open across the courtyard, which was working for a casting company. So I went over there and I asked them if they needed somebody to start right away, and they hired me. And it was great because, again, every single job that I've ever had in my entire life has been a hookup from a friend. Right. So that job then led me to working for a couple of writers who were in development. They had just rolled off executive producing the Jeffersons, and they were looking for an assistant. They hired me, and then I got a really great education in funny, and they were sticklers for everything, and would argue over what sound was funnier and what number was funnier. And I just learned, I soaked up everything because I got to type all their scripts, and back then we were typing on Selectric typewriters, and then we finally got a Wang. So this was like way back in the dark ages, but I got to sit at their feet and hear them talk about comedy. And I never thought I was funny until I had my first breakup, my first real adult breakup. And then I realized, oh, I'm caustically funny. Like I really can go there, but usually it's about myself. And I started to really tap into, oh, I'm actually not a drama person. I am a comedy person. But it was like that kind of winding road of, oh, I see something shiny over here. Let me try it out, and then find something over here. So it was all pretty much within a same direction, which was following the written word. It was kind of following what does it look like on a page? And I was a huge, huge reader. And then I just sort of got into, the writing of it for myself, even though I had always written, even as a kid. Learning how to write scripts was just like the whole world just started to open up for me. It was really great.
Did you have family support in these endeavors? Were they like, our daughter's out, she's writing, or she's, assisting, or were they like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I'd actually like you to answer that question, because I feel like don't we all have those family members who are like, maybe you should get a real job, we don't understand what you're doing, that kind of thing. For me, my mother has always from day one been my champion. And every single day she will call me up and say, oh, you're just the most brilliant person in the world. So she thinks I'm a genius no matter what I do. And I think if I hadn't had that kind of support, for sure, I would not be anywhere near successful in this business. My stepfather, on the other hand, had his dreams crushed at a very early age. And so he, I think, felt concern that I was going to wander into something that I couldn't make a living at. He was a dentist his entire life, but he always wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be a novelist. And he wrote his first novel in his 70s, late 70s, I think.
Wow.
And until he passed, which was really a couple of days before COVID, before the lockdown here in 2020, he every chance he got, he talked about his book, his one book. He'd written other books, but they were about dentistry, but this was like his pride and joy. He'd written some beautiful short stories, but he, I think, was told by his parents, who came out of the Depression, get a real job. So when I got out of college and I said I want to get into entertainment, my mom was like, go do it. Whatever you want to do, we're here for you. And my stepdad was, you should get a job as a receptionist. I will make a phone call for you for somebody I know who's hiring.
Right.
And we had a very big push and pull throughout our entire relationship. We did not get along at all. I think respected each other for sure. But the funny thing is that he was always the first person who showed up at every job that I had. He would always come for lunch. I would introduce him around to everybody at the office. It was a source of pride for him.
Right.
But he was that typical, what's it called? The Great Santini kind of guy. He was that guy.
Uh-huh.
He was the guy
Uh-huh.
who doesn't really tell you he's proud of you. He
Right.
shows you in
Right.
very, very small ways. And so we had a very contentious relationship, and it made me though go, I have to prove to him that I can do this. And so
Right.
one of the last things that happened just before he passed away, I got a bonus from the last bonus that I got. I think it was March. It was actually March. It was the big first week of March of 2020. My last bonus as a executive. And when I told him how much it was, 'cause it was a crazy bonus, it was really good. Just seeing the smile on his face, like he was like, I know you're going to be okay. Like, I don't have to worry about you.
Right.
And that was like one of the last things that we actually talked about. And after that, he couldn't speak anymore.
Wow.
But yeah,
That's
so
beautiful.
it was like, I did have some support, and then I had support in that kind of backhanded, you better
Right.
make it happen.
Right.
Otherwise, this is going to be bad for you.
It's the weird thing where like the generations before us, I guess, it was not always expressed with clarity. It was often, I'm protecting you by telling you how horrible it's going to be and how much you should change your goal.
Right.
I was fortunate that
And
I had
adjust your expectations. Like, don't think here,
expectations of
think
everything.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the hard, that's one of my favorite scenes in quick tangent, but in Pursuit of Happiness, when Will tells his son, like, oh, you're not going to be that good at basketball, and then he like checks himself and he's like, don't ever let anybody tell you anything like that. Like, that's
Right.
them speaking to themselves,
Right.
But for us, and the reason I asked if you had that support, it's like in this industry, what we do is without a clear path and often requires, just some financial wizardry to make it. I just wonder, I know that so many people stop along the journey before they reach their goal. And it's not that they wouldn't have reached it. It just maybe lack the support or they can't graduate with 6-figure debt and go be an assistant, for 5 years. So I was just interested in knowing how that kind of came together for you, because it seems to probably propel this whole hero's journey that you've had yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, you have to have a relentless amount of optimism and enthusiasm and just this dying need to do something. And I kind of say that if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, the creativity would burst out of me in some way. Even if I was in working as a banker, I would be doing something that would have to come out. And I don't know what that is. I don't know why some of us have that and some of us, maybe we have different kinds of needs and outlets. Maybe it's, if you're a mechanic, your artistry is your ability to work on, electrical, mechanical things. I don't know. And I don't understand when people don't have it. I had a friend of mine recently say, she said, oh, when you think you want to do something, you could just go do it. She said, I admire the fact that you have a dream. She said, I never had a dream. And I went, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard anybody say, that you never had a dream, that you never had that desire to do something, whatever that is.
Yeah. I wonder who beat it out of her, because
Yeah.
it had to be there at some point, right? Um, yeah, this turning sad, I guess, but
Well, but I think again, it's the conversation I think we all have on a daily basis about fear,
yes,
because we have to fight the fear. We have to every day get up and go, yeah, the world's going to tell us that we can't do it. They're going to shut us down. They're going to not buy our project. They're going to deny us the job or the promotion or whatever it is. The world's going to try to tell you all the reasons you shouldn't do it.
right,
But you need to have that one thing of why you should, that speaks so strongly to you, that yells at you every day to wake up and go do it. So I
right,
do think that has to trump everything. And I
right,
think for me, for sure, it started yelling so loudly at one point that I couldn't shut it up. And I had to do it, even though if it was going to be a huge leap off the end of the gangplank.
Hmm.
I had to do it. And I'm so happy I did, because I do think that if I hadn't done it, and I always wondered, what if? Boy, that's
right,
a terrible way to die. That's like, I
right.
feel like tomorrow I could get hit by a bus, and I would have literally felt so long as I had this last year, I would be fine.
Huh,
I'm good.
huh. I love that. I love that. I don't like the bus part, but I love the that's the whole point of the journey, to have that feeling. I do want to, and I want to get to the book and to this pivot, but let's kind of just take the steps between working with Dolores Robinson and then being an executive. Like, what was the journey there? What were you navigating in Act 2 of the Kelly Edwards movie?
Yes, but before we do that, can I ask you a favor?
Oh
Because I
yes.
feel like I trampled on something. You were about to say something about who was in your corner, and I
Ah,
stopped you with something I said. So I want to go back to that.
oh, for me, I think about this often. I think about nature versus nurture, right? I feel like I have no more eloquent way to say it, but I'll say, like, if my circumstances would have been different, I probably would have been a really, really good drug dealer. You know what I mean? Like,
Ooh,
really, really successful, not flaunting it, staying afloat, and people are like, "That's the guy," because I kind of always was very, like, deliberate. And I can remember even things going through life where, like, literally times where I'm like 5 or 6 and I'm like watching the adults, like, why y'all doing that? Like, that that doesn't make sense, like, you're not gonna get what you want. And so fortunately, my mother, my father, everybody was really supportive of it. Um, I don't know if my OCD kind of really deliberate methodology of trying to get there helped. You know what I mean? Because it was clear that I had no other intention. I only applied to one school and I had no intention of going anywhere else. And
wow.
then, after that, it was like, I'm going to make this movie. And I spent 6 years raising the money, and I'm living in the house at 25 years old, trying to do this thing.
And
But
now that's normal.
now
Now
that's normal.
living at your house, at your parents' house till you're 25, it's pretty normal.
Yeah.
You're ahead of the
But
curve.
I was a pioneer, I guess, but but I never felt like, oh, you better hurry up, or oh, there's no support. I think I had incremental moments of proof that I was committed to doing what was required of me, with no misconceptions about how hard it would be. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of how it all played out. And so that's why I try and be, like, supportive of as many folks as I can, because it's just that little, you could have a shit morning, and that could be the day you quit. And I,
Right.
I remember reading this book, the first time I got paid for it. It was about it was like, maybe, I don't know, 10, 20 different screenwriters talking about the first time they sold something. And William Goldman was talking about how he had been trying to sell all these things, do all this thing, and nothing would sell. And he wrote a short story or something that got purchased for some modicum, small amount of money. And he said, I was going to quit if that thing didn't sell. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
and here's the guy who wrote classics, and how many
Legend.
more legend? How many
Yes.
more of us are walking around like this? You know, the failures in our own hero's journey because we stopped.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the long-winded answer, I suppose.
No, I love that. I literally just talked about William Goldman yesterday
Huh.
as probably the most probably impactful, most brilliant writer. I read Princess Bride when I was young. Like I just everything he did was just brilliant. But also
Right.
I have a moment too where I was working in features as a I was in a I guess I was a story editor working for Gary Marshall's company, and I was trying to get that next gig. His job was coming to a close. He was shuttering his office because he was going to go be a director for hire. He didn't want to develop anymore.
Mhm.
And I had gone up for 5 jobs, and all 5 jobs I got a call, literally one at a time. They said, "We loved you. You were the person we were going to hire, but we hired someone's," and it was a relative.
Huh.
5 times in a row. Cousin, brothers, son, whatever it was, 5 times. And I thought, well, this is a cosmic joke and this is fucking terrible. I'm done. I can't do it
Right.
anymore. And I thought, look, here I am, little brown girl in this business. I wanted to be a writer. I couldn't get in the room, even though we were doing a show that was about 2 brown guys and there was nobody of color in the entire writer's room. And I was really disheartened. I was looking around the business and going, there's just no place for me. There were no other major women of color at any of the studios in development. The only one that I ever knew of was Linda Morris, who was working for Eddie Murphy at the time. There was nobody else. There was nobody I could model my career after. So after I got that 5th rejection, I said, I'm going to go be a teacher, because the best thing that I could remember up to that point was 8th grade English class. And I was like, I'm going to go teach 8th grade English. And so I filled out the CBEST, I took the test, filled out my application, and I was literally I was walking to the front door to go put it in the mailbox when I got a call about a job at Fox. And I had applied for it. I was told that I wasn't going to get it. So I was like, okay. And by the way, it was a friend. It was a friend, the situation. The people who were hiring were trying to get their buddy in. And I was like, okay, then this is not for me. The universe
Right.
has spoken. And as I was walking to the mailbox, the phone rings in the house. My roommate picks up the phone and she says, Kelly, it's Fox. So the universe was like, you come over here. It's
Right.
over here.
Right.
You know, you were looking in the wrong place, but we got you over here. And I think just like William Goldman, and I'm sure like a lot of other people in this business, it just takes that one. It takes that one to do an about face, and then you're on the road. So you got
So
to wait.
what was the Fox job?
The Fox job, and this I can get you to from point A to point B, but the Fox job was I was a diversity hire. I was the first minority manager of the comedy department. So Peter Chernin had just started this whole program called Minority Managers, and he hired, I think, 4 of them over the time that we were there. I don't think they hired anything after that. But there was 1 in comedy, 1 in drama, and 2 in current at Fox, and I was the first. So, yeah, I was the diversity gal. But it worked out, and I just got in there and I worked my ass off, and and then kept getting promoted, which is awesome. But to answer because I don't think it's a very interesting trajectory, but the list of jobs, so many of them, from Dolores's office through casting the company, through working for Don and Jerry, and then I did a series of assistant gigs between film and TV, working for Morgan Creek, which is Joe Roth's company at the time, and then I worked for Steve Tao and a guy named Rick something or another, I can't remember his name, Rick Schwartz, I think, for Disney, when they were CEs over there on the feature side. And all the while I was reading for New Line. So I was reading 9 scripts a week for New Line and doing coverage just that I could make rent. And then I was going back and forth, just like in little tiny jobs. And then a girlfriend of mine that I knew from high school said she was going to work for Laura Ziskin. Did I want to go work with her? And at that company, I ended up getting my first promotion into story editor. And then I went to work for Gary and became his story editor. And then I went to work for Fox. And then at Fox, I went from manager to director to executive director. And then my boss at the time, Tom Noonan, went to run UPN and he took me with him. So it's just like this little bit of, bup. And then I ended up running the comedy department for UPN. And I loved it because I got to make those decisions about, well, who gets to come in here and pitch and what are they pitching? And then what are we going to buy? And I think for me, the strength of that and the responsibility was amazing. I had a lovely, I loved working there. I got to set the tone for my department. We had Friday parties in my office. It was a place where people hung out. It was a really great collaborative sort of feeling. But I also got a chance to say, and this was one of my big things, when you're working development, you don't always have the ability to decide the trajectory that your network is going in. And I realized that I never wanted to hear another show pitched by a white guy that came in and said, this is a Black family that's living in the ghetto. I said, you will never hear that. I will never hear that again. So if we were going to do a show about Black people, we wanted to see the diaspora, which is why Girlfriends was set in she was a lawyer. So there was a shift in my ability to affect, well, here's what we want to do. And this is what we want to say with the programming that we're putting on. And then from there, I realized that I wanted to expand my repertoire and to do more than just comedy. I wanted to do drama and I wanted to learn how to sell. And I'd been a buyer for my entire career. And if I didn't have another component to my skill set, that I was going to quickly find myself out of contention for a lot of jobs, big jobs. So I went and partnered up with a guy named Jonathan Axelrod, and we had a deal at Paramount for about 6 years. And in that, I learned how to sell from him. He was a master salesman and would often sell things that didn't exist. So I was like, I want to know how to do that. So he'd call me up and he goes, yeah, I just talked to the folks at CBS and we just sold something. And I was like, what did we sell? He goes, I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. So he was that kind of guy who could talk circles around anybody. He was very, very old school Hollywood, just the most fun person to work with. And I learned a lot about, how to be in a room, how to sell something in a room, and then and then I brought to him a whole, so he was like a generation of executives ahead of me, and he'd run ABC comedy department before I even teamed up with him. And so he knew a certain level of exec, and I knew the up and coming execs and the mid strata. So we were a good team because we could hit the whole town. And then after that, I took a job at NBC Universal working for the diversity department. And it was my first real foray into diversity. And I had no idea that all of the yelling and screaming I had done for decades, trying to fight for people of color in the room, either in casting sessions or in getting them hired as writers or directors, was going to finally pay off, where I could actually do that on a macro scale. So they hired me to do diversity for 20 different networks under the NBC Universal banner. And it was a big ass job and it was a lot of fun. And I was on the road a lot and had huge, just a huge amount of scope, and ran the diversity council. So I had all these, presidents of divisions, sort of, I'm going to say reporting into me, because they really were sort of, I was leading their workshops and their, a lot of their diversity efforts. But
Right.
it was a great gig, really great gig. It was less creative probably than I was used to, but boy, it was impactful and interesting.
So it sounds like one of the big takeaways from your journey was that it's so much of an awareness campaign, particularly when you mentioned like those 5 jobs in a row that went to nepotism versus qualifications, right? And it's some version of that over and over again. It sounds like the diversity work that you were spearheading was really creating awareness for a different type of storyteller, right? Um, to swing it back to directors for a second, what would you say were or are the biggest challenges in getting uh, emerging directors who are not white into the industry?
Well, I think we all know that in order to get a gig, you got to get hired. And the problem I think we found all along, and I've always said this for decades, just because it's obvious, is that there have to be enough people in positions of power to hire, and people who are not afraid to hire. And quite honestly, I'm going to say the lion's share of those folks uh, either have a broader, the people who are hiring are successful in the diversity space as hiring managers, are people who have a broader scope of contacts, friends. They make it their intention. It's really easy in this town because people are moving so quickly to just go to your friends. And if your friends and your contacts are all white, and you don't get out there, and you don't have people who are at your house who look like the rainbow, you're going to go for what's easiest. You're going to go for the person that you've worked with 1,000 times. The difference is that brown people have a variety of people in their friend group. We are naturally, our friend group look very differently. It might be because of where we work or where we live, or the fact that we've just seen and we have a comfort factor with everybody. And I think we see ourselves in each other's stories. So I can look at a Latino story and I don't feel like they're other.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that it matters who's at the top, who's hiring. And I think what you're seeing right now is there's becoming a shift. Yes, of course, George Floyd helped everything. George Floyd was was the gasoline on which everything sort of starts to burn around us. But we also have major studios now being run by women of color, people of color. We're getting some really key, great positions of power. We've had some in the past, not like this, where I think it's starting to impact. Look at Bella Bajaria, look at Channing Dungey, look at Perlina Bakwe, look at Tendo Nagenda, like some of those people, Nigel Kirkendall, who are Vanessa Morrison, like look at those people where they've come, and the fact that those people are not going to be afraid to make those hires. So I think we're now in a different place. I hope we're in a different place than we've been before, where it's been a little bit of a struggle. And I said this on Clubhouse about a week ago, which is this is truth. And I'm not the person who will mince words. I used to always think I was going to get fired by my company because I'm the person who just says it all. I don't care. But the truth of the matter is, in my entire time of working as a creative person, I have never had. Your manager's calling me. Never had to have a diversity conversation with a person of color.
Right.
They bring it to the table. They usually offer it first. They're usually, hey, this is what it's going to look like. The stories are integrated. The crews, the cast, it's like I never have to have that conversation. I've only had to have that conversation with people who are not of color. So why is that? Why is there that deficiency? Why is there that that blind spot? Why is it that we are always focusing on, well, what are the brown people not doing to get there, when it's really not their issue? That's not their issue. So if you are finding that your crew and your cast is all white, then you have a problem. Then you have to go meet people. you need someone to introduce you to a whole bunch of new people, because the world just doesn't look like that, and you're losing audience. I deliberately do not watch shows. I had a hard time with West Wing. I did not show up to West Wing for years because that pilot was so white. I was like, you can't have all those people. And I will say, and nobody of color. When I think we had just come off of Bill Clinton's cabinet,
right,
and then we were launching into Bill, maybe it could have even been Bush's cabinet, but we had Condoleezza Rice, we had Colin Powell. Like, how do you do that? How do you create that world? Right. So I boycott shit. Can I say that? I boycott that. I boycott that like crazy, because it's just not okay. It hasn't been okay for a really long time. And you cannot live in this world and say, oh, I just didn't see it. Because then I don't know. Did you never watch an episode of Oprah? Like, what are you talking about?
Right. So, all right. So you feel like with folks now in these positions of power, it's boding well or looking better for more diverse, folks behind the camera, stories, all of the things that kind of have a more nuanced perspective into our lives?
Well, I think we have a long way to go, for sure. I think there's still a lot of stories that haven't been told. We're still way far behind on agent representation. I'm so glad about the cleaning lady, but I wish there was more cleaning ladies out there of those kinds of shows. There's just so much we haven't told. We keep telling the same stories over and over again. So yeah, I hope so. I do think that there's a lot of road to travel before we have arrived. But I do think that with the spotlight on it, unlike before, with the programs out there, with the attention, with the Directors Guild pushing, I think for sure we need to keep the fire burning bright.
Right.
So I do think that and I think we all owe it to ourselves to push each other. So I have this organization called Color Entertainment. I've been running it for 21 years now, and it's creative executives of color. And the reason I started it with Bruce Evans back in 2000 was, as executives of color, we were very isolated. There was usually one of us in a department or one of us on a floor of a company. And we were desperate to hold on, but it was wearing on us. It's, microaggressions land so much harder on us than they do on anybody else. It's easy to feel despondent. It's easy to make missteps and you make one big, faux pas and you're out. And it takes you 18 months to find the next job. So we needed to be each other's people. And the way that the business worked at the time, I think it's less so now because agents have less power than they used to, was you had to go through an agent in order to get a job. So I couldn't call ABC if I knew that the head of programming job was open. I had to call someone at UTA or ICM or whatever, and they had to put me up for the job. Well, those people didn't look like me. None of them. So who was I going to go to for a recommendation? They were going to they had their own people that they were going to, whoever that they'd been working with, but they weren't representing me. And they weren't representing any of my friends. And you can still say today, if you look at the rosters, they're probably still a lot of imbalance and inequity in terms of who they have on their roster, how many people of color they have on their rosters. So it was really, really tough. So we had to do it for ourselves so that I could then call on someone else's behalf to get that gig. I think we're still dealing a little bit in that, but it's getting better. We're sort of sidelining some of that process. But I saw after, so many years of all of that, how this whole business works. So through the Color Entertainment group, we have a Facebook group and everything. And I'm constantly challenging our people and saying, well, what Latino director have you put up for something lately? And recently I just posted something about they selected 3 people for some program. Can't remember what program it was, but it was like some big announcement. And so I said, well, let's make all these people superstars. So how are you going to bring them in? Are you going to bring them in for a meeting? Because we know that that's going to then cascade into other activity and they're going to rise up.
Right.
Just in the way that there's a back channel that happens with all the diversity folks. We always get together and talk once a year. How do we circle the wagons around this director and get that person up the food chain?
Right. Well, I feel like I may be a case study in that. And I tell folks all the time how influential, important, and game changing it was to be in HBO Access, to help kind of galvanize all these like random skills I'd acquired over all the years and experiences and, running my own company and whatever. But like I benefited and I needed someone to kind of help me say, okay, all these things are floating. Let's grab them and put them into the pot and turn the temperature up to the right, level and put these ingredients together for like a meal that's called a TV director,
Hi, it's Crystal Roberson, producing director of Queens on ABC, and you're listening to Let's Shoot with my brother, Pete Chatmon.
Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook is Pete Chatmon's book from Michael Weezy Productions. What started in 1993 has been a marathon of persistence and creative pivots, transitioning from indie filmmaker to teaching at NYU's acclaimed film school, to running a production company, to directing television and commercials, and ultimately eyeing a return to the feature films that gave him his start. A mixture of how-to, self-help, and inspiration, this book is for any person targeting a successful career in the creative arts. Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook from Michael Weezy Productions.
So before we get to the book, can you speak to that HBO Access portion of it? And maybe not necessarily specifically, but what was the goal? How did you get directors like myself out into the, ecosystem of working? What were the challenges? What did directors fail to do when maybe they kind of came to the program and didn't necessarily, pivot toward what you had hoped? That's a lot of questions, but
it is a lot of questions. Well, let me give you the macro on the Access program and the whys and I think some of those successes, and I will tell you the failures. When I came to HBO, there's a lot of really interesting things we can delve into here, because I didn't know the rules of HBO. I'd come from NBC Universal. It's a very top-down organizational structure where somebody at the top says, you do this, and then everybody goes, okay, we'll do this. This is how we're going to implement. Not so at HBO, which is done by consensus. It's a very circular mindset. So it's, you talk to a couple people and then you circle back and you get everybody's buy-in. It takes a lot longer. That's how they're used to it. They develop things it takes a lot longer. Everything takes a lot longer. They bake the cake for a lot longer than a broadcast network. But I didn't know when I went in there what I didn't know. So I get in there and I think I've done huge workouts with the presidents of all of the divisions of Focus Features and Universal, and I put them all in a room and I've had them brainstorm for me and blah, 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 blah. So I did that when I got to HBO. I'm like, they wanted a program. Mike Lombardo wanted a program. And he wanted actually a writer's program first. And I said, well, you won't support a writer's program because you won't tell your producers who to hire. I said, so what if I create 8 great writers who've got great samples and then, or nurture or mentor, and then you don't hire them on your shows. And by the way, HBO had so many fewer shows in general.
Right.
I said, the next year, no one's going to come to the party. I said, so let's not do that. I said, until we've decided how we're going to implement a writer's program. Let's start with the director's program that you already have going. We were supposed to spend $300,000 a year according to the agreement that we had with the DGA. We didn't spend nearly that much, maybe 50K. And it was only a shadowing program, and it was every other year. So it was like this weird stuff was happening, not really happening kind of thing. Nobody booked jobs or anything before I showed up. But we had some amazing people. We had Nisha Ganatra in the program before I showed up. Ryan Coogler was in the program in theory. He never actually sort of did the program. But we had some amazing people in our program. And yet there was no after that. And then was not happening. So I said, let's go back, let's figure out what we're going to do. And I go, okay, this is a program for a company that has so few slots. Almost every show is directed by one director. You know, the Nick was like one guy, Steven Soderbergh. Like there was just no room for anybody. So how do we make it a value add, and how do we develop people? And so I presented Lombardo with this new thing, and I said, look, an HBO credit matters. So why don't we shoot a short so they can get a credit? He's like, okay, let's do it. So had a little bit more money in the budget, but it was pretty close to, I think 300,000 was what we used the first year. So it went up to 450 to shoot these 3 pieces. God bless Effie Brown, because she was our first producer on it, who just made magic out of nothing. We had no budget. And then we had Kimberly Browning after that, who I call the wizard, because she can make things materialize out of thin air. But we had these great producers, and we just decided to shoot something. So they wrote and directed their pieces. The following year, we were able to do a writer's program. And again, most of it was going to be, we're going to develop these people and then throw them out into the universe, because we don't have a place to necessarily pipeline them into, but they deserve to be out there. And with the HBO name behind it, that's enough. So that was our idea. That was our mantra. We broke the internet twice. We didn't realize that that it was going to be so popular, because we were modeling it. We're modeling the intake of applications on NBC, which only got 500 at the time, only got 500 per cycle. And we're like, well, we'll get 500 people. I do know that we had an argument. Me and Mike had an argument about, I said we should curate. I said, I don't think you should throw it out to the universe, because it will overload it. He's like, no, throw it out. It should be access. We're calling it access. So I think in retrospect, I was right, but he was right on the macro idea of, yes, it should be for everybody. So that was our first couple of years. And then that second year was, well, since we're developing a piece of material, let's have the writers write it and then produce it through the director's program. And so it worked really well for a couple of years. All in all, out of 7 years of being at HBO, we had a 80 to 90% success rate, higher rate. We could never get 100%, because every year there was someone on the writer's side, usually, who dropped out, who they weren't ready. They didn't deliver their scripts. We either had to cycle them out of the program, or they decided on their own that they didn't want to be a writer, or they wanted to be a director, or vice versa. So you can't ever have 100%, because there are factors beyond your scope. But I think at 80, 90 or 90% higher rate, where people are working in the business effectively, is pretty darn good.
That's amazing.
And I think the secret sauce of that is twofold. On the writer's side, we delved really, really specifically, we drilled down on truth and emotional content, and your ability to tap into your personal stuff and put that on the page. We didn't really look at structure as much as how much of you are on that page, and how bare are you going to make yourselves. Those things always popped 100%. They were the ones that popped. And then on the director side, and I think on the writer side as well, it's not only are we bringing these people into the program, but we have to wrap our arms around them constantly and continually. So you're not just in a program for a year. We're following up with you. We're introducing you to people constantly. We're expanding your level of contacts. We're using our network to further your career. And that is the thing that every program, that's why these programs work. You know, I've said this before. People get very oogie about, well, I don't want to be the diversity hire. I was a diversity hire. If I hadn't gotten in, I wouldn't have gotten there. Getting there on the merits is a ridiculous concept in this business where you can be somebody's brother and get on their TV show. So why does anybody want to get out there on their own? It's not about that. So you got to get in, and once you're in, and it's about knowing enough people. Really, that's what it is. You are building your village because you are in this business for the next 50 years. It's such a small town.
You can't have it both ways too, because I probably have a similar argument where people are like, oh, well, it's a diversity hire. And it's like, okay, let's say the first that somewhere along the line, it was a straight up, we want a Black dude or a Black person for this slot of 10 or 20. I don't fucking care, right? Like, because now I'm in and I'm doing
right.
Now, if I do a good job, then it will beget other work, or it will help someone who wanted to hire me before but didn't have the argument. Now they can use the fact that another company or network or whatever hired you, and they'll say, well, he just did, Blackish. Maybe now he can do Atypical over here with us, right? And, the flip of it too is like, if they're being compelled for whatever reason to try and diversify their slots of directors, well, that's what we wanted in the beginning, no?
Right.
Right. So then when someone's getting it, like, because I've had things where it's like, oh, well, they're looking for a woman to direct in this final slot, and so it's not going to work out for you this time. That's great. We can't have it both ways.
Right.
And so we got to get in there and kill it, and know that every time, like for me, I always felt like whoever's coming behind me, like if I stink this up, it's going to leave a stink around the idea of the diversity hire.
Yeah.
And that will be more challenging for the next person who comes behind.
And that's so unfair.
Me. Yeah.
It's so unfair because, the other guys don't have that same thing. Then it's just one guy who screwed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a crazy thing. There's so many barriers and so many hoops and I've got so many diversity executive horror stories to tell that maybe one day we'll fill a book. But it's crazy. I had one of my first conversations I had at NBC Universal was with a successful, it was going into a second season and they were hiring directors. And I had to have the conversation about, you had all white male directors on your first year conversation. And I said and it was a new writer, and he'd been taking the advice of his studio. So his studio had been sitting over people, and I had to have that conversation too. But he says, I said, so how was your first 13 episodes? I said, did everybody hit it out of the park? And he goes, no, he goes, maybe 50-50. Mm-hmm. And I said, I bet you I can beat those odds. Mm-hmm. I said, because every single person I send you is going to be stellar. So, and then he ended up doing a better job second season. But the problem is that we have to go in there and fight for it. Right. We still have to explain why someone of color is as good, or if not better, than the person that they were tapping because they were buddies of somebody. It's all so ridiculous, isn't it? It's, you work your butt off. I actually had a woman, I think I could tell this story. I had a director come in, woman of color, sat on my sofa. And when I told her, she had been really, really working, now she's really successful, but she'd been working her ass off to get jobs, and it just wasn't coming. She just couldn't get, just like me trying to get that job, she just couldn't nail it. And I told her the story about how somebody on one of the shows had gotten his gig as a director because he surfed with the showrunner. And she burst into tears.
Hmm.
Because she's like, I did everything right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now she's off to the races. I'm hoping that story hopefully it made her angry enough to keep going and to fight. It can do the opposite. It can kill your spirit.
Right.
But we can't let it. I think there's just too much writing on it for all of us. Because if we give up, who's gonna stand in the way of the bullet for the next guy?
Right.
And I kind of feel like sometimes that was my job at NBC Universal. It was my job at Fox. It was my job at HBO. I stood in the way of the bullets a lot of the time,
Right.
and then just had to keep fighting for that person who was standing behind me to get, we just muscled through to get them that next gig, introduce them to one more person,
So
advocate for
this
them
is
strongly.
this is interesting. I couldn't have seen a better setup actually, because the pivot, right, is you advocating for yourself and taking the bullets for
Yeah.
yourself, right? So how does that happen? Where you move to having a deal now with your former employer and writing on Archive of People and having a book out. Like what was that moment? And let's get into the book.
Okay, so as we saw, it's been a long time coming. So I had been writing as a kid. I was writing specs when I was working on that show back in the 80s, and then didn't see a way forward for me. And I knew that I loved the written word and I loved comics. So I was always at the comedy shows. So I was still feeding my creative Jones that I needed, and found this really interesting life as a development executive and loved it. There was nothing better than working with a writer on a project and the development process, and then being able to see people get their dreams realized. So I think it was just all part of the whole. All along, I'd been taking writing classes and improv classes, and I wrote a spec scandal at a UCLA course, and I wrote a chapter of a novel at an online course with at Stanford. So I was already continuing the journey as a writer. I have boxes and boxes of screenplays, of ideas and short stories and things, and I would show them to people every now and again. So I always knew that there was something that I wanted to do in terms of writing. And the funny thing is too, and I took the Warner Brothers directing program I sort of audited, but they make you do the work. And they kept saying, "Oh, you should direct," and I'm like, I actually see the world as words on a page.
Mm.
Maybe that'll come eventually, but it's really not the thing that gets me up in the morning. Directing actually for me feels like it takes me away from what I'm supposed to be doing, which is the writing part. So I was just trying to learn a new trick. I was just continuing to keep developing myself as an artist and as a way to talk to writers about their writing. That was really one of my goals. I want to know what language should I use that's better than what language I had yesterday. So then I get to I'm at HBO. I decide to get my master's. I get my master's, and as part of my master's program, they ask you to apply to programs and to festivals. It's just part of their thing. And I was like, okay. So I applied to Nichols Fellowship. I applied to like a couple other things. And I applied to Sundance. And I got pretty far in Nichols. I want to say, I certainly semifinals. I don't remember if I got finals. I got down to the last whatever thing is. And I got into Sundance. And I had a panic attack. This is just before. This is 2019, October, or at August, or I think it was August of 2019. They tell me I'm getting in, and completely fall apart. And I'm like, oh shit, now everyone's going to know what I've been doing secretly. I'd been blogging about doing short stories about, I call them bus stories, about riding the bus. Ever since 2015, when I gave up my car, I'd been riding the bus in Los Angeles. People thought I was really weird, but I met so many amazing people and had so many crazy stories, and I started blogging about them on Facebook. So people were getting the idea that I was sort of letting this creative part out of me. It's like a slow moving little, let me just sort of test the waters. So I'd been doing that anyway. I get into Sundance. I go, oh shit, now people are going to know my secret, which is that I've been writing.
Right.
And then when I get off the plane, I got off the plane at Sundance in Utah. And I literally felt like I had slipped to the right skin for the very first time in my life. I felt different. I felt transformed. I felt like when they were starting to talk to me as a writer, as opposed to an executive, when I didn't have to sit on the dais and be the person giving the notes, I felt like I was released. Like there was like this burden that had been lifted from me. Not to say that I didn't love every second of working with writers and developing. I did. But I also know this thing about myself, which is that every 6 years or so, I change jobs and I completely pivot to a completely different thing. And it used to scare the crap out of my parents because they're like, oh no, what's she doing? She's leaving a job. She's leaving a well-paid 401k. What is she doing? And then my mom eventually she realized that she goes, no, she's got this. She's okay. She's going to take it. She's going to be okay. So every 6 years, you'll see on my resume, I'm doing something completely different than I did before. I'm learning. I'm trying to get that learning curve. And I'm trying to do things that scare the crap out of me. And when I went to NBC Universal and became a corporate person, the very first thing that they asked me to do was to moderate panels. And I was terrified. I had never had to do it before. And I knew that if I didn't do it, if I didn't suck it up and walk through the fear, they were going to ask me for something harder the next time. And I wouldn't be prepared. So I did it. Scared the crap out of me. I went to my doctor and got a beta blocker because I was so petrified. I had never done public speaking before. And I took that half of a beta blocker and I called my uncle, who's a minister, and I said, pray for me. And I never asked him to pray for me. I said, pray for me. And I got through it. And then by the end of my time there, that was August of 2007. By the end of the time there, in 2010, I did an event for all 20,000 employees worldwide. And I was speaking in front of 20,000 employees worldwide. So if I hadn't taken that first step, I wouldn't have been prepared for the last step.
Right.
So jumping off the end of the gangplank has to feel somewhat comfortable at a certain point. So Sundance was the first thing. I knew that it was right. Top of 2020, Warner Media asked me to re-up for a promotion. And without hesitating, I said no. I was so clear at that point. It was so evident that every fiber in my body said, no, you have to do something else. And I said, look, I have 18 months on my contract. I'll just ride it out. I go, I can do this in my sleep. I'll just ride it out. And they go, what? Wait a minute. Why don't you take this deal? We'll give you a deal. By middle of July, I took the deal. And a week after I took the deal, I had a book deal. And I think it was the universe going, I hear your panic. I know that you're coming. It's coming up. We know that at a certain point, you're going to freak out. So here's something to help you not freak out. Go do this thing for a little bit and write this book. And I already started to write a book about development and writing. And I still have a book about diversity on my laptop that I couldn't sell. But it worked to let me download some of the stuff that was on my brain that I felt is stuff that everybody should know, but we'd never tell anybody.
Right.
And that's the why I wrote the book. I wrote it because I'd gone to all these given a lot of talks and gone to all these conferences, and everybody asked the same questions. I'm like, well, let me just tell everybody the answers that I have. This is just me saying it. It's not necessarily, the entire industry saying this.
Right.
This is me saying this is my experience. But hopefully it will help people understand the mindset of the executive a little bit better, understand what we look for, understand how the town operates, understand how not to be annoying when you're trying to get, in the door, understanding that it's important for you to keep going and why it's important for you to keep going. And if you have those moments of despondency, remember that it's not really about you. It's about what you're putting out in the world that's going to help somebody else. That, yeah, you want to sell your thing, but if you just remember how I felt about watching Roots and how that comforted me and made me feel like, yeah, I matter. And yeah, I have a history too. And yeah, shouldn't we celebrate it? If I can do something like that for somebody else, isn't that what we're on the planet for? Isn't that why we're telling stories? Is to connect and to share and to say, guess what? You're not alone. You're not crazy. So I think
That's the beauty of.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that's the beauty of the book and today's times. It's like, you can hear, like when I was growing up, there was Making Movies, Sidney Lumet, right? And then it was like, oh, well, when Spike came with a book, it was like different because it was like, I like the tone, the voice, the references are more like in my sweet spot of kind of like resonation, right? And now we can read your book and get everything that you're talking about and have you in our back pocket or over our shoulder or whenever we need to kind of get a reminder of the process and have someone speaking to us in a way that is counsel, but also like supportive, which I think is the great tone of the book. I was going to ask you, what's the toughest? So I'm going to read the table of contents. You've got in chapters in order: laying the groundwork, the executive mindset, getting in, let's do lunch, creating your game plan, the winning pitch, the pilot script, notes, and then congrats, you sold your script. What was the toughest chapter to write?
Ooh. I think the toughest was probably laying the groundwork because so many things have changed. And I think if anything gets revised in future iterations, if I'm so lucky to revise it, I think it's the fact that things change so quickly. And when I first wrote it, we went from, I grew up in broadcast. So I was really aware of broadcast. And then I, of course, pivoted to, working in the cable side and then into the premium cable side. So I understand it, but it's changing so fast with the streamers and their language is so, it's very fleeting. And I've even heard of people talking about in my MFA program, they would use terms that we don't really use in daily life. And so I was really cognizant about not trying to overpromise, terminology that's not going to exist tomorrow. Right. And right now, and I had just had conversations with people at Netflix and at Amazon about the terms that they use about their audiences, but they're still trying to figure it out. So trying to capture that in a book, in a chapter, was hard because I guarantee you in about 2 years, those terms won't exist. Just right. In the fact that, Netflix didn't exist like 20 years ago. So we're dealing with such new things. And I think that we're in for another shift. Like the ground is still shifting underneath us. We're still in quicksand.
Right.
Nothing is safe. And if you've seen how quickly we've moved from Cable was king for 30
Mm-hmm.
seconds. Cable's no longer king. Now it's premium, but it was premium
Right.
for a minute. And then premium became like, even HBO was HBO Now and Go, and nobody understood what the difference was. Well,
Right.
one was, you know what I mean? One was if you had a package and one was standalone, but we didn't understand it. And then we went from that, even internally, we didn't understand it. And then from that to HBO Max. And then
Right.
then
I don't even know how to credit myself, because I'm like, did I do HBO's The Flight Attendant or HBO Max's The Flight, like in the bio? I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Well, technically it's HBO Max because it wasn't developed at HBO, it was developed at Max. But now those things are converging, right?
Right.
So if those things are converging, and again, there's, you know, who even knows? Who even knows? So I feel like I think that we're in for another shift. There was also going to be that moment where, you know, I think we all predicted that each individual stand-up was going to have their own channel, like actors were going to have their own channel. Some of them do, like Kevin Hart's got his own channel. But then you go, but we're still in a big melting pot of nothing's really defined itself yet. And I
Right.
don't think anything's defined. I don't think it's going to happen for a minute, but something's coming. I don't know what it
Right.
is.
Right.
But it is going to be great. So I don't know what it is. But it feels like we're on the precipice of something new, even as we sit here today and we know what today looks like. So
Right.
that's why it was hard. It was, and again, the book is not a manual. It is not here's the history of television. It's not here's how to write a pilot. Like, I needed to stop short of entering into, I had a whole chapter on writing the comedy pilot. That wasn't my lane for this book. That's not
Right.
what this book was about. There are plenty of books out there about here's how to write your comedy pilot. Manny Bassadis just wrote a brilliant book about that. Go read his book. So it's trying to figure out, well, what could I say and how do I stay within the lane of, this is what I need from you as an executive. This is what you need to know about dealing with me. I need you to know this is what I'm looking for in your pilot pitch, but I'm not going to get into this is how we're developing your pilot, because that could have been a whole book on its own. We could have talked about act breaks versus no act breaks versus, you know, your characters and developing your you know, your story and breaking story. We could have done a whole other thing,
Right.
comedy versus drama. And I needed to make sure that I was staying in a lane. And I also wanted to keep it readable. I wanted to keep it fast paced. I was really modeling it after Stephen King's On Writing and Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. I wanted to make sure that people felt like that they could get through it and it didn't feel like a labor.
Right.
Because that's when you check out and you don't get to the end. And at the end, you need to know, we need your material. We need you to keep going. We need you to feel like you have momentum coming out of this book so that you want to go put something on the page. So that was the whole goal. It was really concerted effort about, I think, motivating and trying to demystify, you know, we're not all that smart. Executives are just the same. We are the same level of smart as you are. We've read the same books that you did. We are the same. We're the opposite side of the coin of the exact same process. We are doing our best to try to help you. If we fall short, that's because we're human beings and we're just not that, you know, we have our failings, but we're all trying to do something. We're all trying to make something. So that was that's the Megillah.
That's the Megillah, and audiobook coming soon.
I just recorded it on Wednesday and Tuesday. I just did it. That is a trip, having to hear, because I don't love my voice. I have like a very nasally voice. Like I'm just like, but I did this little demo for them. They're like, yes, you can do your own audiobook. Because I'm like, I know how I speak, and I know that I speak I have a very rambly kind of whatever way of speaking. And I'm like, not anybody, other people aren't going to really be able to do it without it feeling odd. So I did it, and it was a crazy experience. It's hard.
So I'm now auditioning to do my own. So I think I have to do something to, sell myself as myself.
Yes,
And then we'll
do it.
see. But I
It's
want to,
hard
because
though.
it's very much like there's a cadence, and there's a like, where you were emphasizing things, and I love the idea of being able to hear the person who wrote it in my ear.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Here's one reason that I made sure that I did it. I bought a book on Audible recently. It was the
Mhm.
life autobiography of Booker T. Washington, a man of color. It
Right.
was read by a man not of color. And I went, that will never happen here. I
Right.
can't have that
Right.
happen. And it was so
Right.
terrible that I couldn't listen to it. I just couldn't listen to it. I was like, that's so wrong on so many levels.
Well, not on this one. We got that right. So
Exactly.
I turned the corner with two final questions, and this one's new, and I don't know, maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not, but I'm asking people, in the movie of your life, what is the genre, who will star as you, and who is directing said film? Or I'm sorry, it could be a limited series. It could be, a sitcom, like in the story of your life in today's, different buckets of content delivery. Who's playing you, what genre, and who's directing?
Wow. Tall order. I will say genre. I'm going to say it's certainly in the comedy vein. I would love to say that I'm a musical. I'm a musical. I'm going to say I'm a musical.
All right.
It's a
All
musical
right.
comedy. Here's why. Because I've been told by many people that I sing in the office all the time. I have virtually no recollection of half the time, but somebody used to say, "Oh, you used to sing opera all the time." I'm like, that doesn't sound like me. But I was constantly singing in the office. I used to have, in the old days at Fox, they would put a plastic pad, underneath your chair so you could roll around on the carpet, right?
All right.
And I was always
Right.
doing like a break dance at a certain point where I'd go big finish, and then I would tap dance and do this, right?
Right.
So it would have
Right.
to be a musical comedy. That's that's the weirdest question. I love it. Who would direct? Um, can they be dead? Because it might be Busby Berkeley.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who directs the best musical comedies these days?
It could be dead. Busby's a good choice.
It has to be somebody who really understands the action of a musical, where you feel like you're in the middle of it and you're moving along with it. So it might be, I don't know enough of maybe whoever did Singing in the Rain. I don't remember who that was.
Okay.
And then who would be in it? Okay, everybody for my whole life has said, and I'm so grateful for this comparison, but they always said that Vanessa Williams, I look like Vanessa Williams. I look nothing like Vanessa Williams, except that we're the same color generally. It'd be Vanessa Williams because she can sing and she can dance. And she's a brilliant actress. So I would go Vanessa Williams.
There you go. I love it. Coming in winter 2023.
I need a story, though. I need a story.
Well, we just sold it. We'll figure it out.
I'll find it in the executive chair.
Exactly. And then the last one is, what three qualities do you think that someone needs to make it in this business? And I'm sure it's been touched on in our conversation, but like if you were to just extract and say it's like, boom, 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 what are those three characteristics or qualities?
You need, for sure, you need strength, emotional strength. You need resilience. And I say strength because I find it's hard to keep going. It's hard to, and again, let me go back to that thing we started talking in the beginning, which was the St. Vincent masterclass. In it, she talks about, and again, every single thing she said is stuff that we've all said before. So it's not anything new, but I just love the fact that she did say it. She was so vulnerable about all of it. And we will all constantly tell ourselves that we are worthless and that we don't know what we're doing. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if we've seen so many movies that just when somebody gets something good, they're kneecapped, right? It's always like, hey, something's going to go great, and then she trips and she falls on her face. We're always expecting that fall. We're always expecting the bad thing to happen, and so we tend to work out of fear. We tend to live in that place of fear. Don't get too comfortable. Don't rejoice too much. Don't acknowledge the good things that are going to happen, because something's going to tear it apart. And so we tiptoe around our lives, and we don't necessarily live out loud and to the fullest. So you need strength to be able to barrel through regardless. And you need that resilience to keep going even when you do get kicked in the teeth, because you will get kicked in the teeth. But if you don't take it personally, because I think we all take it personally. We think, oh, that they didn't call us back because they don't like us. Has nothing to do with you. It's that they're doing 1,000 things. They're off in their own movie, living their own life. And you are a footnote in that scene. You are not in their scene. So you just have to keep going. So it's those two things I think you desperately need. And then I would say the last thing is the thing that you brought up earlier, which is you need someone in your corner. You need someone who tells you every day, keep going. You need that person. When I was working with Jonathan Axelrod, every single day that we were in working together, he would call me up and he'd go, hey, Sunshine, let's go sell a show today. Hey, Sunshine, let's go sell a show today. Every single day. I could not get up and do it without hearing that every day, because it's so hard. You're going to get a no 90% of the time. We keep at it like little crack addicts because we know that 10% is there, that we might win at the roulette table one time. And isn't that crazy? It's the most joyous, brilliant thing about this business is that little glimmer of hope will keep you at it. Being able to tell that one little story is that you desperately need to get out of your body. So I do feel like having somebody, could be your mom, could be your wife, could be your baby that you look at and you go, I'm going to do this for her. I'm going to make this world better for her. But there's those three things, I think. And I think that I feel terribly bad when people don't have someone, that soft place to land, that place that's going to go, no, you're not insane. No, that's a great idea. No, you are actually good. I love how you wrote that sentence. I love how you wrote that dialogue. Like, we just need that little, when we hold on to that little grain of something, it matters so much.
Right.
When you do a wonderful piece of you do art and you make art, you take someone's writing and you make art out of it, Pete. You need someone to tell you, thank you for that art. And I think when we don't have that, it makes it so much harder to get up and do it again the next day.
Right. I agree 100%. Emotional strength, resilience, and support. And sounds like acknowledgement even.
Yes, acknowledgement.
Acknowledgement, right?
Yeah.
Well, Kelly Edwards, this has been awesome. This goes in the category of someone that I already knew who now I know better because of the podcast.
I love your podcast. Great. I love that you do this too. This is so important. And I love that you not only do you have the most interesting people on your podcast. So thank you for including me. but that you allow them the time to have a conversation that is so much more in depth. You really go to that place where let's unpack, who we are so that we can share that with somebody else. I feel like it's a different kind of storytelling, right? It's a different kind of connecting. So I don't know why you started this, but I love that you did it. And I think you are, as you know, I'm really one of your biggest fans. And unfortunately, I feel like I have taken way more credit for you than I deserve to, because as I was hearing some of your other podcasts and hearing all the stuff that you've done before, I'm like, oh, I didn't really do that much. I totally didn't do that much in the book of your life. But I'm thankful to have this little tiny piece of it.
Well, I will say, and there are two things that I'll leave the audience with at this moment. There was a time when I came into your office and I saw my name on the whiteboard, and I think you had East Coast directors and West Coast, and people like that maybe had gone through the program or maybe not. I don't know if I had at that point. And it was super affirming for me because, and I don't know if I was meant to see it, but I saw it and I was like, I don't know if I'm on any of my fucking whiteboards anywhere. So this right here is huge, right? And then the other thing was, and I think we've chatted about it when we worked on our 30-second pitches. And here's who I am. And the fact that all of our meetings are predicated on being able to clearly communicate who you are while taking the time to craft something that's honest, but strategic in connecting you to what these folks have to say with their show. And I had done all of these things for all of these 15, 16 years before I came into the program. And I was very self-deprecating about it, or thought I was. And you were like, you sound bitter. And I was like, I guess I fucking am bitter. Yeah, underneath it all, I am. But I've chosen to adopt this technique that really is not doing what I think it's doing. And when I tell you that pivot, just extracting the self-deprecation out, just made it a clean, this is who I am, what I'm doing, what I've done, how I see the world. I honestly feel like that, coupled with, other things picked up along the way, was when things began to click. Because I knew that I could just go into a room and it ain't about who's on the other side. Totally. It's about me having researched that and presenting the best self I can. So I can go from program to, hired. So it's what you've done with the programs and with your advocacy and now with the book is monumental. And you'll probably never know all the people for whom it provided a pivotal moment for their journey. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was lovely to hear. I appreciate that.
What's up, people? This is Pete Chatmon. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter via @PeteChatmon. Follow the pod on Facebook on our Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon official page, and hit up our mailbag with questions, suggestions, or hey, donations if you're feeling like it, via Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon @gmail.com. And just in case you need to know how to spell it, that's Pete with the last name Chatmon. All right, that was episode 34 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon, starring Kelly Edwards, and I will be back soon with another episode. We are figuring that out. I don't know what the topic will be. Might be a craft episode, might be another interview. I'm going to have to play catch up again. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this pod that I do them in bunches, and my bunches have run out. But I'm back on it. I'm wrapping my episode 2 of Reasonable Doubt on Tuesday, and that'll give me a little more time to start reaching out to folks and lining them up. So if you happen to know anyone that I should be interviewing, hit us up. Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. That's the Instagram handle, or hit me up directly, Pete Chatmon on Instagram or Twitter. And as always, y'all, stay safe, spread love, and keep creating.